วัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีค่ะ
So first of all, welcome back to Thailand.
Thank you. Very happy to be back.
So many people know you as a youth advocate and also a mental health advocate as well. So do you think you've succeeded in this area?
Wow. I think succeeded, that's a very lofty term. I think that I do feel that I have succeeded because I've been able to sort of converse with so many different people and learn so many people's different stories and sort of integrate that into my speeches and in my work. So I think in that way, being able to sort of touch so many lives and interact with so many different people has been very fulfilling. So that to me is success. But I think there's still so much work to be done. You know, I've done a lot of the sort of advocacy speaking part, but I also want to do more of the sort of concrete work in the mental health space in particular.
When you say concrete space, what do you mean by that one?
Yeah, so for example, and I talked about sort of the mental health research that I did on international schools in Bangkok and sort of this need to reform these mental health institutions. And I think, you know, part of that concrete work would be first, you know, weaving this into the journalistic piece and podcast series that I talked about, and then actually speaking to these schools and presenting, you know, ideas for reformation. Because it's easy to get up on stage and talk, but, you know, there has to be some sort of follow-up to that.
So more projects and
Yeah.
everything that needs to be taken into action. Simply.
Yes, action. Because, you know, I've been doing a lot of the talking and the collecting of stories, which is the first step, but now I need to sort of build off of that and produce actual results. Yeah.
So what would you say has been the biggest highlight throughout your journey as a youth advocate?
I think, you know, specifically mental health hits close to home for me. And I have, you know, someone very close to me who dealt with a very difficult situation related to mental health. So I think for me, the most powerful thing has been able to produce a sense of catharsis for the people close to me in this research and advocacy that I'm doing. So that has been very rewarding. But also to sort of produce a sense of catharsis for these people in my greater community, other international students.
So the fact that you have talked to many students from various international schools, so what have you noticed in terms of the mental health issues or the struggles that they had to go through that you find it really surprising?
Yeah, I think the mental health issues that I've come across, specifically the ones that kind of manifest themselves physically. So examples of that would be like eating disorders or a student who is cutting themselves, things like that, very serious situations that you can see. I've come across cases where schools will, you know, sort of turn a blind eye to those students because they don't necessarily embody this image of a perfect, well-rounded, high-achieving, healthy kid. So I've come across situations where students who deal with those sorts of things are asked to leave school to seek help elsewhere, which, you know, when professionals are saying otherwise, which is not productive.
But when it comes to international schools, most of them would have like a counselor so that they can actually talk to these students who have mental health issues or any other struggles that they go through. But why do you think it's still not enough to help these people?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with sort of perception of these issues. Like these resources are in place. Absolutely. Like these schools are not facing a resource shortage as so many schools do. I think it's mostly this sort of ideology that a student who is dealing with something that manifests physically is beyond help. Even counselors who, you know, specialize in this area are unable to, you know, sort of assist them. They have to find help somewhere else. And there's this sort of notion that, you know, Thailand doesn't have the resources for, say, eating disorders, when in reality there are resources available. And, you know, this person very close to me who went through this was able to find those resources in the local community. So asking the student to sort of go elsewhere to seek help is not productive, especially when you have these resources at your own school.
So what do you think schools should do so that they can help those with mental health issues or other struggles that they might be facing now?
Yes, that is a very big question, and I'm still sort of in the process of researching actionable solutions for this. But I think it comes down to sort of, first and foremost, a mentality change at these schools. So, students who sort of deal with these issues, who sort of slip out of this image of perfection, can be helped. And small steps can help these students ultimately. It doesn't require sort of for them to go away for a while and recover. Like, it can happen within their community, and I think that community is actually important in recovering. Like, separating a student from their community when they're struggling actually makes their situation far worse. So sort of changing our mentality around, I guess, image and how to sort of help.
Well, but when we talk about the issue related to mental health, if we go back around like 10 or 20 years ago, mental health is still considered taboo.
Absolutely.
And people think that this is something that we should not talk about. But for your generation, is this still an issue or not?
I think that Gen Z in particular has been very, very good about bringing this conversation to the front lines, which I find that to be a beautiful thing. And I think that's something that we don't see in previous generations. I think that being said, there, at these international schools, although you have these, Gen Z students that are advocating, you have the higher ups at these schools who maybe don't have the same mentality about these conversations on mental health and image and losing face culture.
And based on your experience studying at an international school here in Thailand, and then you later studied in the US, so what was the experience for you back then when you had to deal with issues like mental health or other issues like eating disorders or any other personal struggles that this generation has to go through?
Yeah, I think for me, growing up, when I dealt with mental health issues, I always thought that coming forward about those issues and communicating about those issues was sort of a sign of weakness. And I was surrounded by this community that really pressed this notion of perfection, being a well-rounded student, being healthy, being a high-achieving person. And so I think I suppressed a lot of those feelings that I had. And then when I went to college, I was like, oh, these are actual, issues that have bubbled up again in my sort of young adult life. So I sort of, I guess, wish that early on I would have tended to those things.
Especially during high school, you end up in this competitive culture where we try to get good grades, try to do really well in sports or music. So how did you manage to navigate this sort of pressure?
Yeah, it's very difficult to navigate. I think I was very lucky to have a strong support system at home. I think my family has been a very critical piece of my mental health journey and tending to my mental health. I think if I didn't have that support system at home, it would have been a lot more difficult to balance academics and sports and showing up as a good friend and all of those different components. And that's not to say that I didn't slip up at times, and there were moments where I was completely, overwhelmed with all of the sort of duties as you have as a young person. But I very early on was able to build a strong support system. I'm very grateful for that.
And that support system was really important for you.
Incredibly important, yes.
Yes, and people of your generation in particular, many people in your generation are more active on social media, and many people say that social media plays a huge role on people's mental health and their well-being. So how do these things actually add on to these social pressures that they face at school?
First, I think that's a great question because, and this is probably a bit of an obvious answer, but social media is not going anywhere. And we are in this sort of age of digitalization and technological advancement that is sort of progressing every day. So I think, the role of social media in our lives is just going to become more sophisticated. So I think learning how to navigate our lives parallel to social media and the advancement of social media is very important. So I think that there's sort of two facets to this. first, on social media, we're sort of coming into contact with so many people's stories, but a very small window into people's stories. And I think fundamentally, Instagram, for example, is what we call a highlight reel of people's lives. So we aren't really getting this full picture. We're not seeing sort of the nitty-gritty day-to-day things that people go through, the very human struggles that people go through that is very, widespread. And I think for a young person who is already dealing with a sort of psychological and cognitive vulnerability, these coming into contact with all of these displays of perfection can be quite damaging in a mental health context. I also think, social media is a platform where hard news is disseminated. And I think that, you're scrolling through your feed and you're coming across bad news after bad news after bad news because that's what sells. Mm-hmm. That's what gets the most hits. And it's hard to compartmentalize as a young person. You're sort of inundated with all of this stimulus and negativity, and that can be overwhelming. And you're only seeing sort of a small part of it also, not the full story.
And for young teens, to be very specific,
Yes.
they are really bombarded by all
Absolutely.
of these social expectations, whether it's at school, at home, and now social media
Yes.
and even fake news. So
Yes.
why do you think tackling mental health among teens, among the youth, is becoming much more challenging in this era?
I think to preface this answer, I think that there's this perception that it is becoming more challenging now because I think this is, nowadays we're actually starting to consider these issues as something important and something to really contemplate, especially when it comes to young kids. So I think that is a great thing, the fact that we are allocating so much time into examining mental health issues in young people. But to answer your question directly, I think with all of these, stimulus is coming from all different areas, especially with technology, right, and social media. So I think when these kids are sort of seeking mental health support and, therapy, it's sort of hard to go back and figure out the, where are these issues coming from? Because there's so many, there's so much stimulus. It's like it could be from, social media. There's so many different things to consider when trying to sort of unpack the etiology or development of mental health issues, which is important in solving the issues. So I think, there's so many different forms of stimulus to consider for this generation in particular.
With so many forms of stimulus, whether it's pressures at school, at home, or even online. So how can young teens find their self-love or self-worth, considering that they have so much pressure around them?
Yes, and I think I've said the word stimulus 4,000 times in this interview. But with all the stimulus, you sort of lose track of who you are, I think. And this has happened to me as a young person. You lose track of who you are and what you find important at times. And I think this is sort of a simple thing, but, going back to square one and really learning how to be by yourself. Learning what brings you joy, what sorts of activities you can do by yourself that will sort of fill your cup again. To sort of disconnect and figure out who you are and what matters. And then to reconnect with the world when you've done that. And I think to sort of implement that on a daily basis, that kind of self-examination and taking time to do the things that you love and find, fulfilling is very important for young people. And it's a very small thing. And another point, I think learning how to build your support system in your community is important. It can take time to find those people, but to decipher who wants to see you succeed and to sort of tend to those relationships and to fall back on those relationships when you need to.
Yeah, and from your experience, how did you manage to find your self-love and self-worth, especially when you had to go through a lot of struggles since you were young?
I mean, I'm still working on it. As a 22-year-old who graduated from college, I'm some days it's easier than others. And I think it even fluctuates throughout the day. But I would say, sort of back to my previous answer, building my support system was probably step one. And it took a lot of time. I think existing in an international community where you're sort of seeing people come and go constantly, it can be hard to figure out who belongs in that network, in that really close network. So I think for me, it was really important to decipher who those people are and to fall back on those people. And I think self-sufficiency is not about doing everything in a vacuum. Like self-sufficiency can be deciding what you need and determining who you need to talk to. That is self-sufficiency as well. And then the second thing, sort of discovering what fills my cup, what gets me up in the morning. And I think, that research is one of those things that kind of reminded me what I can give back to the world, what I can do well, and sort of what I need to continue doing, And I find that storytelling is a very important thing to me and something that gets me up in the morning and fills my cup. So,
how does it feel to know that people in this generation are becoming much more aware of this topic and many people are not afraid to talk about this anymore?
It's incredible. I think it's very reassuring, and I think it's sort of gives me hope for where things are headed. And this conversation that Gen Z is sort of spearheading has kind of trickled to other generations as well. Adults are coming forward and talking about struggles that they faced as young people, and I think that it's very inspiring. I'm very, very glad.
Are there any other changes that you hope to see in terms of the mental health space? Are there any policies or any other measures that you want to see, especially in schools or in workplaces, how they deal with people struggling with mental health?
I think I'll speak specifically about international schools because that's where my research sort of lied. But I would, I think changing this perception of what it means to be like a well-rounded student. I think being a well-rounded student can mean dealing with the complexities of being a human being, of struggling. And I think, implementing that on an institutional level in dialogue, the way we talk to people who are struggling at schools, is very important. It's a very deep-rooted thing and difficult to sort of address head-on, but I think that that's something that we can start doing for sure.
So well-rounder as in what's happening inside of them instead of just the outward successes.
Absolutely, right. And it's okay if those inner struggles bubble to the surface. You're a human being. You are meant to, go through these sorts of things. A student should not be facing mistreatment for when those things become apparent to the outside world, because it is human nature.
So what would be your top mental health advice to young teens today?
First, I would say people can heal. I think there's this sort of mentality that, if you struggle with mental health, you are going to have to deal with it your entire life, which, it might bubble up again over the course of your life, but sort of having strategies and processes and a support system to deal with it can help keep it at bay. It can help you really work through and heal. So that's the first thing. Second thing, communicate. If you notice something is not right, if you're starting to deal with mental health issues, speak to someone. It can be an awkward conversation, but speak up. And sometimes the process of just putting it into words can help you heal or can begin the healing process. And finally, be patient. Be patient with yourself when you are struggling. I think this is something that I have dealt with in the past with mental health issues. I'll get very sort of frustrated with myself because I know that some of these struggles maybe aren't completely, they don't entirely make sense. They might be a bit nonsensical, but I feel this way and it is valid. So I think in order to heal, you need to place a sense of validity on those struggles and to be patient with yourself.
Because at the end, people's feelings are actually valid and
yes.
people are allowed to feel their feelings.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Are there any final words that you would like to give to young teens who would like some encouragement from you?
Wow. I would say anyone can struggle and, be, as I was saying, patient with yourself, but also be patient with the people around you. You don't know what's going on in everyone's inner worlds. If you see someone in the hallways who, you know, is struggling, be a sense of a source of support for people, you know, and it can go a long way.
That's very inspiring. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
ขอบคุณค่ะ